Welcome to the Advanced Freelancing Podcast. Every week, you'll hear strategies for building your online service-based business your way. And now, here's your host, veteran freelancer, author, and TEDx speaker, Laura Briggs.
You are now listening to episode 86 of the Advanced Freelancing Podcast, and I'm doing a separate introduction here because this is the first time I've interviewed a guest in this new format and reboot of my podcast, and I was super excited to talk to her because of her expertise. My guest today was Hilary Sutton. She is a writer, speaker, and consultant, passionate about helping people spend their days in work that is wildly fulfilling. She is the host of the podcast Hustle and Grace, which you should totally go check out right now and binge some of that after you're done with this episode. She's also the author of several ebooks and courses, including More and Less, 21 Productivity Hacks for Creatives. Also, she's served as a professor of communication, social media, and journalism at Southern New Hampshire for 5 years, and she's a freelance writer for hire with expertise in direct response copywriting and content marketing. As a freelancer, she has served clients ranging from Broadway shows to nonprofits large and small, creatives of all stripes, and consumer brands, and has written hundreds of articles in dozens of publications, including USA Today and the Washington Post. She and her family live in the DC metro area, and we will post all of her contact information at the bottom of the show notes. This episode is for you if you've been thinking that perhaps full-time freelancing or full-time remote work might not be for you, and how could you create a hybrid blend where you've got essentially an employee-employer relationship as part of the mix, but not as your full-time gig. I hear from more and more freelancers these days who are looking to build intentional freelance businesses. They don't want to be working 40 or 60 hours a week as a freelancer. For some of them, freelancing was their ticket out of working in a dead-end job, but they're now realizing that freelancing full-time isn't quite the right fit either. The cool thing about these side hustles is that we can rearrange our business and client load whenever we want to reflect the new dreams and goals that we have, and Hilary is the perfect example of that. So stay tuned in this episode to hear more about the different transitions she's made and how she recommends you do things like pick which industry or type of skill to focus on, and how to keep clients thrilled about coming back to work with you on retainer. Thanks again for tuning in. And remember, check out iTunes and please leave a review of this podcast. It helps other freelancers find this advice. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Advanced Freelancing Podcast. It has been a while since I've had a guest on the show, but I am so excited to have Hilary here today. Why don't you tell us a little bit about you and your freelance journey?
Okay, Laura, to start with, thank you so much for having me. It's such an honor. I've admired your work for a while, so I'm just totally tickled to be here. In terms of my story, so I have been a person from the beginning who liked a lot of different things. I've always been a person who loved writing. I've loved theater. I've loved connecting with people. In college, I could not decide on a major for the longest time. Ended up with like 3 or 4 minors as a consolation prize. But I started freelancing it was about 2007, 2008, which if you'll remember, that was around the time that the Great Recession hit. So freelancing was something that I wanted to do, but it was also something I was kind of forced to do because at that time, companies were on hiring freezes, people weren't hiring full time. And so it was sort of like a happy accident that I got into it at that time when people were actually sort of looking for some freelancers. So I started freelance writing then. I was also balancing it with a career as an actress in theater, especially musical theater. And it got to a point where, in between performing, I was doing some writing here and there, but it wasn't really enough to pay the bills. And so I was also, working retail and doing some different things. And so I thought I would go back to school, get a master's degree so I could at least possibly get into the online education boom that was happening at that time. So I thought, if I could maybe teach online, I could still have this autonomous lifestyle that I love. I could work from anywhere. I could go audition in the middle of the day. So there was something about a full-time job that felt very limiting to me and very stifling to me and my personality. Because like I said, in the beginning, I had 3 or 4 different minors, and I had loved studying lots of different things. So I've always really liked variety. And so I did that, and I studied media and communications with a focus on media. And I really dove into the social media space. And that was also really interesting timing, because that's when companies started realizing, hey, we should hire someone, or we should hire a freelancer or a consultant to help with our social media. And so that's sort of how I really got started as like a full-time freelancer. And I did social media. I did a ton of blog writing. I still did article writing for magazines. And so that sort of grew into a career as a content marketer, as a direct response copywriter that I have today. So now I live right outside the DC metro area. No, it's in the DC metro area, right outside of DC. And I am a full-time freelancer. There was a time just a couple of years ago that I thought that maybe what I really just wanted was to work remotely, and that would give me the flexibility and the autonomy that I wanted. Well, it turns out I really like working for myself. So I work as a part-time consultant with a marketing staffing agency, and that's sort of my anchor client. I'm technically a W-2 there, but I'm part-time. I work remotely. I feel like they're my client, to be honest. But I am part of the team. So I do that part-time, and then I sprinkle in whatever I have time for around that. So I do direct response copy. I do freelance career coaching. I have some online courses and some intellectual property. And I do public speaking. I do lots of different things. So I like to keep the variety going, but I do have this dependable kind of anchor client in the staffing agency. So that's where I am now.
Yeah, that's amazing. And I think it reflects a lot of what we freelancers like, which is a lot of us get that feeling of being stifled in a traditional job where you're doing the same thing all day, every day. And even though sometimes the variety can be a little bit crazy, it's often a welcome part of the freelancer's life, because, you know, you do get to decide who you work with and who you don't. And it's interesting that you brought up, you know, you have this like they're kind of a client, but not really, because it's also like an employee-employer situation, but it's super flexible. So you view it like a client. It's very interesting because a lot of times for people that are looking to do full-time freelancing, I tell them, you know, never just have one client. That's super dangerous, right? Like you should never put all your eggs in one basket. And obviously you haven't done that. But what advice do you have for freelancers who maybe get an offer like that? Like I see a lot of people who are like, oh, a recruiter contacted me about a remote opportunity or a part-time opportunity. They want to pay me W-2. How do you set that up for success in the rest of your business being the context of freelance, right? So it sounds like they're very much like a client for you, but how can freelancers tell the difference between an employer that really wants to treat you like an employee and someone who's more like willing to be flexible with the remote work?
That's a great question. I mean, I think some of that you just have to feel out in that interview process, but I think you also have to be honest from the beginning what your values are, what you care about, that they're going to get your 110% effort, but you're not going to have that same approach to the company that other people might, that go in there from 9 to 5. And you know what? Like for me in my situation, I don't view them as an employer. And I also feel like they kind of put me in my own special category as well. So, you know, there are times when it's so beneficial because I'm outside of the politics, right? I'm outside of the water cooler chatter and those parts of, you know, working in an office that I frankly don't feel comfortable with and don't really like. So I think it's important to be honest from the get-go. I think it's important to ask the tough questions in that process in the beginning. And you have to kind of ask yourself, like, what is important to me? You know, how much anxiety does it bring me to, you know, have 5 different clients that all get 20% of my time, or, you know, 10 different clients that all get 10% of my time? You know, is it less for you to worry about? Is it less for you to think about? Does it kind of bring you some peace of mind to have a client that's 40%? You know? Yeah. And I think because it's to me, it's a happy medium also, because a lot of times I think freelancers in a freelance line item on a budget feels unemotional to cut at the end of the year. Whereas if you are a W-2, I think that employers and I think companies don't feel as comfortable just being like, oh, we'll just reallocate that money. Because I've had that experience myself. I had a client that was about 20%, 25%, I think, of my income in recently, just a couple of years ago. And at the end of the year, they just said, oh, we're rearrange some things and we're going to hire someone in-house. And that's that. And it was like over an email. Like it was so impersonal. And all year they had been a huge piece of my pie. But, I was just a line item for them. And so I think there is something beneficial about having that relationship where, you're not full-time, you don't do the commute every day, you're not there every day, but they rely on you, you rely on them, almost like a retainer. I think it's a good situation, depending on what you want and what your goals are.
No, those are all great points. So you're talking about sort of a setup that's a little bit different than your traditional freelance setup. Most freelancers have, defined channels for marketing, how they're going to find their clients. How do you suggest that freelancers interested in maybe adding in a client like this, like what you have? How do you go about finding someone like that? Do you use different terminology or pitching techniques or networking to find a client like that and to kind of convince them that you're the right one for the role? Because like you mentioned, a lot of times we are seen as like outsiders, like freelancers are brought in to work on specific projects, or maybe like as a writer, they might do some of the content marketing, but how do you kind of bridge that gap of being like, hey, I have all this expertise as a freelancer, but like, here's the opportunity where I think I could work better as a part-time employee or W-2?
Yeah, I think it depends on, where you're coming from and what you were doing just prior to that. But for me and my situation, I had been working full-time for a company remotely, and I just put the flag on my LinkedIn saying that I was open to conversations with recruiters. I moved my location to the DC metro area because I was moving to DC. And it was almost immediately when I got here, a local company reached out to me. And of course, it's a marketing staffing agency. So, it didn't take long for them to find someone who was a right fit. But I will say too, I was a great fit for them, not only because I was looking and open to freelance and part-time and remote opportunities, but also when I, in my previous job, I was doing like the marketing writing and the kind of writing that I liked, but the topic wasn't something that I was passionate about. So in my off times from when I wasn't working on the projects for my job, I was contributing to newspapers like the USA Today, writing about careers, writing about how to nail, your first internship, those kinds of topics that actually aligned really beautifully with this client, this part-time gig that I have now. So I think it's important before you find that kind of perfect sweet spot that you're really putting out there and cultivating your own personal brand around the topics and the things that you love to write about, or the projects that you just love to do. Like, don't just get bogged down in whatever it is, that your current job, like the project's assigned to you, but also like create your own work. I think that really attracts those kind of special opportunities. And it'll also show that you're more than just a writer. You're more than just a designer, like whatever it is that you do, that you also have a passion for this specific niche. Because when you have a passion for a specific niche and someone needs someone like you, they're more willing to be flexible. They're more willing to be like, okay, well, we really want somebody in the office and we really want to pay this, but maybe we can rework some things, because like, who's going to be more perfect for this job than you? Probably no one. So we'll do what you want to do. We'll make it work.
I love that you brought up a couple of things there that I think are so important for any business owner, or even someone who's looking to be a professional and work as an employee. And that is making yourself visible to recruiters on LinkedIn. I probably post about this several times a month in my Facebook group, because it's just like, it takes 3 minutes, go turn the button on, tell the recruiters exactly what you're available for, because like, that is always the most searched person. Like, every time I go into who's viewed my profile on LinkedIn, recruiters is always number one. It's like, you are viewed by 11 recruiters. it's like, those are great relationships to cultivate. It's free. It's easy. Like if your profile is optimized, that's perfect. And then you also talked about building your own brand, which I think is important. And people get bogged down in that too. Like, oh, well, if I don't have a lead at, USA Today or Business Insider or somewhere where I can post, like, use your LinkedIn and your website to build your brand. Be posting articles, be posting content that is relevant to your industry, because people also find you that way through the hashtags, through the words that you use, through how frequently you post. I think you have a really great perspective because you've worked in these different industries. And one thing I'd love for you to break down is the difference between working remotely and working as a freelancer. The reason I bring this up is because I'm in a lot of communities with other military spouses, and a lot of them are looking for remote opportunities because obviously they move a lot. They want a job that's going to travel with them. And there's sometimes this confusion between, okay, well, what's the difference between working remotely and, say, starting my own business as a virtual assistant or a writer or something like that? You've actually done it. So from your perspective, what would you say those primary differences are? And how do you know which one might be right for you?
Oh, that's a great question. Well, I mean, when it comes to what are the differences, it's pretty cut and dry to start with. Like remote is a job where you might as well be in an office because you have, it's basically like one client, you have one job, you have one, supervisor, you're probably benefited, you probably, get 401k, whatever, insurance. And you're an employee just like anyone else, except that you don't have that commute into the office. Whereas a freelancer, that is where you can kind of like cultivate and make it whatever you want it to be. It's where, you are the business. You don't work for another business, but you are the business. And so you not only do the work, if you're a writer, not only do you do the writing, but you also do the business development. You go and find the clients. You take care of billing and invoice. So, if you're thinking about if a business is like The Office, then you are everybody in The Office. Like I'm talking about The Office TV show because I'm finally catching up on it. I'm like 10 years too late, but I'm in season 9. I'm almost done. No, season 9. That's the final season. I think it's season 9. You are Phyllis. You are Michael. You are Angela. Like you're everyone if you're a freelancer. But if you work in as a remote employee, then you are just one of those guys and you work from home.
I love that. That's a great way to explain it. And I think some of it too comes down to the level of risk you're willing to absorb at the outset. Because honestly, I know a lot of people are like, oh, like a full-time job, whether it's remote or in office, it's so much more stable. There's a lot of arguments to make that like your job could be eliminated, or like the company that I used to work for before freelancing completely closed 2 years after I left. So stability and risk is a questionable thing at that. But when you're starting out, like you said, as a freelancer, you have to go create your own paycheck.
Mm-hmm.
In a job, you're showing up and they're telling you, these are the things we need you to do. You're going to get the benefits. This is going to be your paycheck. It's going to drop in your account every 2 weeks. A freelancer is taking on more of that upfront risk of saying, okay, I have to go chase the clients. I'm going to take on the responsibility of paying the taxes as a self-employed person. I'm going to figure out what to do with my benefits, etc. So some people are a little bit more averse to that. And others might be like, oh yeah, I absolutely want to be my own boss. So those are the important like differences there between remote and freelancing. And I think it's helpful for people to know that. And the good thing too is you could work remotely and still have a freelance side hustle, so there's lots of different ways that you could set it up. So you talked about doing a lot of different activities and kind of like using those to land where you are now. For people who are just getting started with digital marketing and freelancing, how do you figure out what it is you want to specialize in or do and pitch that when there's so many options? I know a lot of people who are like, I'm kind of into social media and maybe a little bit of writing and some other things. How do you decide to narrow down, or do you not recommend doing that?
That's such a good question. I think it depends on your personality. I think it depends on how much time you have on your hands, available, and how much of a learning curve there is. If you got a degree in marketing and you've kind of been in that world and you already have, specialized interests, whether it's the arts or restaurants, maybe you're a foodie or whatever it is. Like, I think pay attention to the things that catch your eye, like pay attention to the pages that you follow on Facebook, pay attention to the brands that you scroll through on Instagram and the accounts that you follow on Twitter. Like, what are the topics that catch your eye that you have a natural interest in, I think that that's a really great place to start, because I think that you're going to be more invested. You're going to have more of a passion for those projects. I think, if you're still in the stage of sort of like building a portfolio and finding, who you are as a marketer, I think that it's good to start small, like build those personal relationships, those personal connections, start spreading the word that you're building a freelance business. And maybe you don't want to ask someone directly, for them to hire you or for their business, or maybe you do, but you can minimally start spreading the word in your network that, hey, like I'm getting into this. I've always kind of had a knack for social media. I really think that I could help, small like mom and pop restaurants in particular really nail their social media. I see so many like bad pictures of food on Instagram. I love taking pictures with this like amazing portrait mode that I have on my latest iPhone. Like I really think that I could help people, and start just like one email at a time, like one Facebook message at a time, like one, coffee meetup at a time, and build out the word, like spread the word about what it is that you like. But I think starting with something that you're passionate about and pairing that with a skill that you're confident in, I think that's a really, really great place to start. And I think that, there are lots of different things that you could do, but the more that you sort of narrow down in the beginning, I think the more success that you can have, because I think you can be confident that this is what you do well, and that you can really serve your clients well that way.
I love that advice, because I think it helps to be a little bit of a generalist when you get started, because you don't know what you like or don't yet. But I feel like when you say, all right, I'm going to be a social media marketer, I'm going to do content strategy, I'm going to do, SEO and pay-per-click ads. Like when you take on 6 or 7 things, it's really hard to keep up with the changes and software in 6 or 7 industries, right? Like
Absolutely.
You can easily claim competency in like 1 or 2 where you're like, yes, these are the blogs I follow, these are the podcasts I listen to. I do it enough within my day that I know what works as a best practice and what things are coming down the pike as trends. But I feel like I see a lot of freelancers. I see this a lot with VAs too. They'll post like on their website, these are the 45 different services I can do for you. And it's right. Like that sets you up to be so frazzled and constantly having to go back and be like, okay, have there been updates in Facebook ads? I haven't worked with a Facebook ads client in 4 months. So now I have to go back to the drawing board, reteach myself that again. And that can be really stressful. So I think it's good, like you mentioned, as soon as you get started, start seeing what you gravitate to, start seeing what you like, what converts well with clients too, like what are clients asking you to do? Which are your easy sales calls? And they're like, oh, sold. I so don't want to do this. You sound like the expert. Those are all signals that, you can take and apply to your life. So on that note, what would be one of your best tips for getting clients to work with you consistently? Big hurdle for a lot of freelancers, new and experienced. They do a lot of one-time projects. So it sounds like you develop relationships with your clients where it's more of a long-term situation. How would you suggest that freelancers set themselves up to be open to more of those opportunities?
I love that question. I think that's so important. A few different things come to mind. One, say yes to projects that you can nail. Like, I think it's nice to stretch yourself, right? It's nice to try new things, but in terms of building relationships with clients that you're going to have for a long time, like you really want to build that dependability and that trust. So say yes to things that you feel very confident in. Also cultivate real relationships. Like when you hop on a call, don't just like get right down to business. Like ask someone about their family, ask someone about how their sports team did. Like, what's the weather like today where you are? And I know that sounds kind of silly, like to always start with the weather, but it's such a nice icebreaker and such a reminder that like, yes, I'm here, alone in my home in Northern Virginia, but you might be in your home office in Nashville, like whatever it is. I think it's so important to take the time to build a relationship besides just getting down to business. And then I thought I had a third thing, but you can just cut this because I can't remember what it was.
That's okay. No worries. So yeah, I love that. And especially I've noticed that if you live somewhere unique, that can also really be a great icebreaker. My husband and I just relocated to Minnesota a few months ago, and every single person who finds that out wants to know how cold it is, how bad the winters are, why on earth would we move to Minnesota? And it instantly breaks people down from that like level of professionalism when you show up to a call. And I used to say that like when people would ask me that too, like, where do you live? I'm like, oh, my husband's military. So we live wherever the Navy sends us. And it would always disarm people to make them feel like they're talking to a person and like less salesy and everything. So I totally agree. Yes. And another one of my tips for that too is when you are preparing to talk to a client or to start building that relationship, check out what you can about them online. A lot of people will share things on their LinkedIn or on other social media where you can, and I just openly admit to it, like, hey, I kind of stalked you a little bit. I saw you run marathons. That's amazing. And like,
people are so flattered by that.
Exactly. They're like, oh yeah, I started doing it 5 years ago. Like it starts this whole like honest communication thing where you really are trying to get to know them and you can ask questions about it or use that as an icebreaker. And you're right. It sets people up to want to continue to work with you because you took that little bit of extra effort to build a relationship and to have communication.
Absolutely. And that reminds me that, when you said like hopping on the phone and talking about something, like that is one reason that I'm a big believer in like, especially if I have a prospect, like a new potential client who's emailed me and asked me like, what are your rates for this or that? Like I want to move that conversation from like cut and dry email to the phone like as quickly as possible because I want them to know that I'm a human. I want to know that they're a human. I want to figure out how I can help them succeed at their job. Like if I can write the perfect thing for them, then that's going to help them put food on the table for their family. So as soon as you can, like move from email to phone. I think that's something that is really not done as much these days as it used to be. But I think that can really be a game changer in building that rapport and building that connection with a client.
Yes, I am the same way. I always want my clients to get on the phone with me, even if it is for 5 minutes, because people can present themselves differently on paper and then even in like phone or Zoom or Skype communications. So I want them to know I am a real person. I also feel like it's a much better chance for you to convert the sale because in an email, like if you get one of those emails that's like, oh, send me your rates and you write back, here's my rate sheet. It's so impersonal. There's no value demonstrated there. And the whole conversation is revolving around money, which does not put you in a positive negotiation situation at all because it's very easy for the person on the other end of that computer to open it and go, oh, too expensive, whatever. Or maybe I'll shop around. But when they've had that conversation with you, they're like, man, she really knew her stuff. She seems pretty organized. I saw her website. Clients are raving about her. Like, I just need to get this off my plate. Like, why waste further time thinking about it? You've built up that value there. So I could not agree with your advice more. So many freelancers are like, oh, we live in a digital world. Let me just close it over email. And it's like, not everyone can close over email. Most clients, they still want to talk. Like you are still a stranger to them. So like, let's take that off the table a little bit and, have even a 5-10 minute phone conversation. You're in a much better position there. So I love that advice because I try to do the same thing all the time.
Yes.
Yeah. So where can freelancers listening to this episode who are like, wow, she knows so much stuff. Like where can they go to find you and follow you more?
Oh, yeah. I would be so honored if they would check out my website, HilarySutton.com. I'm also on Twitter and Facebook at Hilary Sutton, and I'm on Instagram at Hilary.Sutton. Unfortunately, someone else has Hilary Sutton, and I can't seem to get it back from her. So those are the places that I am online.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for agreeing to come on the show and sharing so much of your insight. I think that's going to be really helpful for people who are either new to freelancing or who are thinking about, expanding their freelance business. You shared a lot of really valuable insights.